thorny topic. Well, joining me now is Fox News senior judicial analyst and the author of Theodore and Woodrow, How Two American Presidents Destroyed Constitutional Freedom, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, we've got all these proposals, the president, the senators, all these proposals that are coming forward on immigration. Do you see any legal problems with some of the proposals that they're making?
Well, there's a host of legal problems because a lot of these proposals, Tom, are based upon the political interests of the people making them rather than the reality of the law on the ground. And the reality of the law on the ground is law and economics. When people who are here illegally are permitted to stay, does that help the economy because they can now work and pay taxes and eventually vote? Or does it hurt the economy because they might be a drain on the entitlement system to which many facets of our society have become accustomed?
Right.
How severe should the issue at the border be? Do we want to, if we're going to allow the 13 million that are here, who got here illegally, to stay here, what about the next wave of 13 million that are right behind them? And what about the 13 million that preceded them, who went through a more rigorous procedure before they became lawful residents and citizens? So a lot of these things will be debated. You know, this is a very, very difficult subject matter. In the earliest days of the country, the federal government welcomed anybody that wanted to come. There was a time in the Lincoln era when the government would even give immigrants who came here a couple of acres of free land if they could demonstrate that they were going to farm the land. That's how anxious we were to have people here. And quotas or getting the government's permission before traveling here didn't begin until the late 1800s, when California wanted to stop people coming in from China. They looked different, they sounded different, they had a different culture, and we didn't want them in our midst. That attitude, they look different, they sound different, we don't want them here, today, by our eyes, seems repugnant. It seems based on bias and prejudice and ignorance and stereotypes. Nevertheless, that persists. It persists among the public, and it persists as animating the law, because the law consists of quotas. And the people who are troublesome to the law have breached the quotas by getting here notwithstanding the quotas.
So at one point, you're saying this country was open borders.
Yes.
And that brings up then the moral, ethical, human part of this.
Well, the human part of it is the natural law argument. And the natural law is a phrase used to identify those aspects of our humanity where we are free to make all of our own choices. We don't need the government's permission. We are free to develop our personalities as we see fit. We are free to think as we wish, to say what we think, to publish what we say. We are generally free to marry whoever we want. We used to be free to use the most contemporary technological means to defend ourselves. We used to be free to own and trade and use private property to its highest good. We theoretically still are free to travel. As Ronald Reagan used to say, to vote with your feet, to move from New Jersey to New Hampshire, from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania, to leave the country, to come into the country, because the right to travel, freedom of movement, is a natural right that the government doesn't have the ability to interfere with on the basis of a group to which we belong. The government can restrict my freedom if I commit a crime and I'm to be punished for it, of course. But the government cannot restrict my freedom because of the place where my mother was at the time of my birth. So the natural law argument says anybody that wants to come here can come. It doesn't mean they're entitled to the government's benefits, but it does mean that the government can't criminalize the act of coming here and can't punish them for coming.
Isn't that basically open borders?
Yes.
Which our country used to have.
Yes, it is open borders. I know that this is unpopular and may be unpopular with a lot of your viewers, but open borders is a perfectly legitimate, sound, long-time acceptable argument. I mean, open borders was an argument made by St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and John Locke and Thomas Jefferson and Martin Luther King and John Paul II and Justice Clarence Thomas. Not necessarily open borders, but freedom of travel. Open borders is a sophisticated modern-day argument articulated by our cousins in this building, the Wall Street Journal, who have demonstrated over and over and over again that the more people who are here from other countries willing to do menial work at menial pay, the better off our economy is. That is beyond dispute. And the people who reject that argument, I suggest, reject it because of nativism, a belief that Americans have more rights than others. That's hogwash. We all have the same natural rights. We have more of an opportunity to exercise those rights here because the government theoretically is restrained by the Constitution. But in terms of the rights that come from our humanity, they're all the same.
All right.
Each of us is the same.
I'm going to take the other big buzz story of the week, go from immigration to gun control.
Well, you're not afraid to touch the third rail.
Well, I haven't gotten to gay marriage or abortion yet, but
I'm there if you want to know that.
But the question is that we're taking everybody that's a law-abiding citizen and saying if you have a gun, you have to register. We're taking all the people that came into this country without going through the immigration law and saying you have to register. In other words, shouldn't we just focus on the people that commit the crimes rather than all the citizens trying to exercise their rights?
You are very unique as a television person with an extensive background in law enforcement. And I am different, too, as a television person with an extensive background in law enforcement. You in California, I in New Jersey. We both have ended up in the same place. The purpose of law enforcement here is not to arrest people before they commit a crime.
Exactly.
You can have societies like that, but they are terribly oppressive and not free at all. They arrest you before you commit a crime in Russia. They did in the old East Germany. They do in North Korea. Would we be safer if the police could just confiscate guns from anybody they thought were dangerous? Yes, we would. But who would protect us from the government, from the police? Who would want to live in a society like that? So again, the natural law says you have the right to defend yourself. And you have the right to use the most contemporary technological means to do it. Stated differently, the same firepower that the government has. So when the president says he's a hunter, because he shoots skeet at Camp David. But God bless him for shooting skeet. It's a great sport, and he should have familiarity with guns. I think most adults should have familiarity with guns. But that is not the reason for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was not written to protect your right to shoot skeet or to protect your right to shoot deer. It was written to protect your right to shoot the bad guys when the police can't or won't. And, this is a hard and difficult truth, it was written to protect your right to shoot tyrants when they take over the government. The authors of the Second Amendment had just fired their guns at the king's soldier because he was a tyrant. The king's soldiers because he was a tyrant. And they beat the king. And that's why we don't sound like Varney. That's why we sound like the way we do.
which bottom line is, no matter whether it's guns or travel, it's freedom. And always appreciate your view. Thanks,
Pleasure,
Judge.
Tom. Thanks for having me.
You bet.